At my husband's burial, I got a text saying, "I'm alive, trust no one." Margot Hayes was 66 when grief stopped being a private thing and became a puzzle with sharp edges. The day they buried Ernest, the world felt muted, like someone had wrapped Spring Creek in thick gray cloth. Even the wind moved carefully through the cemetery trees, and the pastor's words sounded distant, as if spoken underwater. Margot stood beside the open earth with her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles turned pale, staring at the casket as if sheer attention could force it to correct itself and open. Hit that subscribe button and tap the bell icon so you never miss our latest uploads. Ernest had been her life for 42 years, her steady place, her answer, her home. He had never been loud, never the kind of man to demand the world look at him. Yet he had built a small, honest life with his own hands, and for Margot, that was everything. She remembered him as he truly was. Grease-stained palms, shy smile, eyes that softened the hardest day. The cemetery version of him, the sealed box, the rushed farewell, didn't match the way Ernest had filled rooms. Her phone vibrated the exact moment the first clump of dirt struck wood. She almost ignored it, offended by the interruption, but the vibration came again, urgent and insistent. When she glanced down, she saw an unfamiliar number and 2 words that made her breath vanish. "I'm alive." Margot's stomach dropped so violently she had to brace herself. The message didn't belong in reality. It was cruel. It was impossible. Her fingers shook as she typed, each letter taking effort. "That's not me in the casket. Who are you?" The reply arrived instantly, like the sender had been waiting with their thumb hovering over the screen. "I can't say. They're watching. Don't trust our sons." The cemetery tilted. For a moment Margot thought she might faint. She shoved the phone into her purse like it was hot coal and forced herself to keep standing, forcing her face into a shape that wouldn't invite questions. And then she looked at Charles and Henry. Her boys, grown men now, stood near the casket with expressions that seemed rehearsed. Charles had his solemn face on, the one he wore at formal events, and Henry's eyes were red but restless, darting like he was tracking time. Jasmine, Charles's wife, held her phone too close to her body, checking it behind her veil. Margot tried to tell herself grief made people strange. People handled pain differently. But the text had planted a splinter under her skin, and everything afterward pressed on it. On the ride home, Doris, her longtime neighbor and the closest thing Margot had to family nearby, kept glancing at her with worry. Margot stared out the window at familiar streets that suddenly felt staged, like sets in a play. At home, the quiet was brutal. Ernest's mug sat where he'd left it. His jacket still hung by the door. The house carried his presence so strongly it felt wrong to breathe without him. Margot moved through rooms as if she were trespassing. She tried to be logical. The message had to be a prank. Some stranger with a sick sense of humor. But who would know enough to mention her sons? Who would choose the exact moment of burial? She sat at Ernest's old wooden desk and opened the metal box where they kept their documents, hands working on muscle memory. Insurance papers, deeds, savings records, everything neat, everything familiar. And then she saw a detail that didn't fit. The life insurance policy wasn't what she remembered. The coverage had been increased, quietly recently, from a small amount to something much larger. The date was there in ink that felt suddenly accusatory. 6 months ago. Margot's throat tightened. Ernest would have told her. He never made decisions like that without her. They had always been partners, even when the bank account was thin, even when life had been hard. Especially then. Her phone vibrated again. Check the bank account. See who's been moving money. Margot stared at the message until the letters blurred. Then she stood up, grabbed her coat, and left the house with a purpose she hadn't felt since Ernest was alive. Grief could make you foggy, yes, but it could also sharpen you, like pain turning into a blade. At the bank, Mrs. Thompson greeted her with gentle sympathy and the practiced softness of someone who'd seen loss before. Margot asked for statements, told herself she was only being responsible, only being cautious. The withdrawals punched holes in that story. They weren't small. They weren't ordinary. Money had been leaving their savings in amounts Margot would have remembered discussing, and the timing was too neat, too steady. When she asked who authorized them, Mrs. Thompson said Ernest came in person. Margot asked to see the receipts. The signatures looked like Ernest's name, but something was wrong with the lines. Too shaky, too uncertain. Ernest's handwriting had always been firm, clean, as if he believed words deserved respect. Mrs. Thompson hesitated when Margot asked if Ernest had been alone. "Well," she said slowly, "I do remember one of your sons came in with him once. Charles, I think. He said he was helping his dad with the paperwork." Margot thanked her, left with copies, and sat in her car for a long time without turning the key. Her hands were on the steering wheel, but she felt miles away, staring at nothing. Charles. Helping with paperwork. Insurance increased. Withdrawals made. And that message at the cemetery. Margot drove straight to Ernest's shop. She expected to see devastation if the accident story was true. Scorch marks, broken equipment, the lingering smell of something ruined. Instead, she found the shop oddly neat, like a place that had been cleaned for inspection. The machines were intact. The walls were unmarked. Nothing looked like it had exploded. Her heart began to pound, slow and heavy. In Ernest's desk she found a note dated days before his death. Ernest's handwriting was there, clear enough to recognize like a fingerprint. "Charles insists I need more insurance. Says it's for Margot. But something doesn't feel right." Below it, another note. "Henry brought papers to sign. Says it's to modernize the shop. Why all the hurry?" Margot lowered herself into Ernest's chair and pressed her palm against the wood of the desk as if it might steady her. Her sons had been pressuring him. Her husband had been worried. Then she found an envelope with her name on it. She opened it carefully, as if sudden movement might tear something fragile inside. Ernest's words were simple and devastating, written like a man leaving a light on in the dark. "If you're reading this, something happened to me. Don't trust anyone blindly, not even our sons." Margot's vision swam. She held the letter to her chest and felt the emptiness of the shop around her. Ernest had been afraid. He had tried to warn her, and she hadn't known. She had been too busy making excuses, too busy hoping her sons would return to being the boys who once ran through this shop with scraped knees and bright laughter. That night Charles came by the house with a bottle of wine and a smile that looked polite, not loving. He talked about taking care of her, about managing the money, about a good community where she wouldn't be alone. Margot listened without interrupting, noticing how quickly he moved from comfort to control, from condolences to plans. Henry arrived the next day with similar concern wrapped around the same pressure. Sell the house, move somewhere smaller, let them handle the complicated parts. Complicated parts. Margot had built a life with pennies and patience. She had kept a family together on love and stitched fabric. She wasn't helpless. But she was alone now, and that was what they were counting on. Late that night her phone buzzed again, and the message felt like a cold hand closing around her wrist. "Tomorrow, go to the police station. Ask for the report on Ernest's accident. There are contradictions you need to know about." Margot stared at the screen for a long time, then set the phone down and looked around her kitchen. The same kitchen where her sons used to beg for extra dessert, the same table where Ernest drank coffee every morning. Whatever had happened to Ernest, it wasn't finished. And if someone was warning her, it meant danger wasn't buried with him. So Margot made a decision that tasted like iron. She would stop being the grieving widow everyone expected. She would become the woman Ernest trusted enough to warn. Margot woke before sunrise, not because she was rested, but because her mind refused to let the night settle. Ernest's letter lay folded beside her bed like a small, heavy stone. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the casket lowering into earth and the words on her screen, "Don't trust our sons," burning brighter than the cemetery candles. She dressed quietly in plain clothes and slipped the letter into her purse with the bank statements and the updated insurance papers. The station sat near the courthouse, a squat brick building with a parking lot that always looked half empty. Margot walked in with her shoulders squared, pretending she was only there to handle paperwork the way any widow might. A receptionist offered condolences and asked what she needed. "I'm here to ask about my husband's accident," Margot said. "Ernest Hayes. I need the report." The receptionist disappeared, and Margot waited under a bulletin board covered in faded posters. A tall man in uniform stepped out, silver hair at his temples and a name tag that read Sergeant O'Connell. Margot recognized him at once. Everyone in Spring Creek knew him. "Mrs. Hayes," he said gently. "I'm sorry about Ernest. What can I do for you?" "I want the report on the explosion at his shop," Margot replied, forcing the words to sound ordinary. "My son said a machine blew. Ernest was burned. He died." O'Connell's eyebrows lifted. "Explosion. That's what they told me." He guided her into a small office and began searching through records. Margot watched his face shift from routine focus to confusion, then to a frown that deepened with each click. "I'm not seeing it," he said. "Nothing logged under an explosion. Nothing under workplace incident at Hayes Bicycle Repair." Margot's pulse rose. Maybe it was filed late. He shook his head. Any injury that's serious should create a record. Fire department too, if it was an explosion. He leaned back, studying her carefully. "Did you speak to the doctors about what caused his condition?" "They said he wouldn't wake," Margot answered. "They didn't explain much beyond that. Charles and Henry handled a lot." O'Connell nodded, as if a pattern had formed. "Hospitals can be vague unless you push. But if there's no report, then either there was no accident at the shop, or someone lied about it, or someone interfered with procedure." Margot's throat tightened. "Who would do that?" "I'm not accusing anyone," he said quickly. "I'm telling you what's possible. If you suspect you were misled, you can file a statement. Bring any documents you have, dates, times, who told you what. If something doesn't add up, we'll look." Margot stood, legs strangely light. "I'll bring everything I have." O'Connell walked her back to the lobby. "And Mrs. Hayes," he added softly, "if you ever feel unsafe, you call us. Day or night." Outside, the cold air hit her face like a slap. She sat in her car without starting it, staring at the steering wheel. No report. No official trail. The story her sons had given her existed only in their mouths and in her exhausted trust. Her phone buzzed. "There are no records because they didn't want any. Keep going." Margot didn't reply. She hated that the sender sounded certain, but she hated more that the certainty matched what she'd just learned. Back home, she called Doris and asked her to come over, not to cry, but to witness. Doris arrived quickly, took one look at Margot's face, and sat down as if she were bracing for bad weather. "There's no accident report," Margot said. "None." Doris frowned. "But Charles said." "I know what Charles said," Margot cut in, then softened. "Look at these." She spread the receipts across the table. "Do those signatures look right to you?" Doris leaned in, squinting. "It's his name, but it's shaky. Ernest's writing was usually cleaner." "It was," Margot whispered. "And Charles was with him when some of this money moved." Doris's eyes widened. "Margot, are you saying your sons?" "I don't know what I'm saying," Margot replied, though the denial felt thin. "I'm saying the story doesn't fit the facts." After Doris left, Margot did something she hadn't done in weeks. She made a list. Not a list to soothe herself, not a list of chores, but a list of questions that could not be answered by feelings. If her sons were telling the truth, the answers would exist somewhere outside their mouths. First, she went to Spring Creek Funeral Home. Charles had handled everything, claiming it was what Dad would have wanted. But Margot realized she'd never actually seen the invoices. The receptionist recognized her and offered a sad smile, then returned with a folder. Margot's hands shook as she flipped through the pages. The service was stripped down to the bare minimum. No public announcement in the paper, no visitation hours, no notification list. Even the guest book had been optional, marked as declined, as if having neighbors pay respects would only complicate things. Did anyone from Ernest's shop call to ask about coming? Margot asked. The receptionist glanced at a blank line on the form. No, ma'am. We didn't receive any names besides family. Your sons asked for a private service. Private. Another soft word that sounded comforting until it was used as a wall. Margot left the funeral home feeling as if the town itself had been kept from saying goodbye. At Ernest's shop, she tried to picture the Tuesday morning when he supposedly suffered an explosion. She walked the floor slowly, stopping by each machine. The welder sat quiet and intact. The compressor looked untouched. The shelves were too orderly, the tools hung in perfect rows. Ernest had been tidy, yes, but not like this. This was the tidiness of someone cleaning up after something they didn't want seen. She crouched near the baseboards, searching for soot, for warped paint, for any scar of heat. The paint near the outlets wasn't blistered. The ceiling tiles weren't stained. Even the workbench surface looked recently scrubbed, the wood grain brighter than she remembered. She opened the trash can. Fresh liner. No burned scraps. No torn, blackened rags. The emptiness felt staged. Margot stepped into the back room and stared at the chair where Ernest used to eat his lunch. She remembered the routine: coffee in the morning, a sandwich at noon, a small thermos he refilled at home. Ernest didn't take supplements. He didn't trust miracle vitamins. If Charles and Henry had truly been hovering over his breakfast, asking about his habits, it wasn't concern, it was preparation. On the drive home, she stopped at the bank again. Mrs. Thompson was busy, but she made time when Margot asked softly. Margot didn't accuse. She asked questions the way she'd learned to do with stubborn children, gently, repeatedly, until the truth slipped out. Did Ernest seem like himself? Margot asked. Mrs. Thompson hesitated. He seemed tired, a little distracted. And the time Charles was with him, Margot pressed. Did Charles speak for him? Mrs. Thompson's eyes flicked toward the lobby, as if checking who might overhear. He did, she admitted. He kept saying, "Dad, just sign here. Dad, just initial." Ernest didn't argue, but he didn't look pleased. Margot thanked her and left, the admission thudding in her chest. Charles had been directing Ernest's hand like it was a tool, not a person. At home she checked the house phone bill Ernest kept in a drawer, old-fashioned and careful. The last 2 months showed several short calls to numbers Margot didn't recognize, often late in the evening. When she dialed one from her cell, it rang to a disconnected line. Another went to a generic voicemail with no name. A third was answered by a clinic receptionist in the city who said, politely, that she couldn't discuss any patient matters without written authorization. By late morning, Margot noticed a car she didn't recognize parked down the street. Dark, clean, engine off. It sat there longer than a neighbor's quick visit would justify. When Margot stepped onto her porch, the driver's head turned slightly, then the car rolled away as if it had simply remembered an appointment. She told herself she was imagining things. Then she remembered Henry's words, "You're imagining things," and felt anger sharpen her spine. If she was being watched, it meant the danger wasn't only in the past. She considered going straight back to Sergeant O'Connell with the hospital printout, but caution held her. If Charles and Henry had already been shaping stories for doctors and clerks, they could try the same with police, at least long enough to buy time. Margot needed more than suspicion. She needed a chain of facts that couldn't be snapped. She photographed every page, then hid the originals inside a cookbook on the highest shelf. After that, she wrote a note in her own handwriting. If anything happens to me, these papers matter. She sealed it in an envelope addressed to Doris, then tucked it under the fruit bowl where Doris would notice it if she came looking. Then she practiced saying, "I'm fine," until the lie sounded believable enough. She changed her routine. Curtains half closed. Doors locked. She kept her phone charged and her purse near the door. She left a lamp on even in daylight because shadows felt too easy for secrets. And she kept Doris close, calling more than once, making sure someone else heard the steadiness in her voice when fear tried to bend it. Her phone buzzed again. They'll come soon with concern. They'll say you're confused. Don't argue. Listen. Remember everything. Margot's skin prickled. She set the phone face down, as if that could stop the future from arriving. It took hours, not days. That afternoon, Charles's car rolled into the driveway. Henry followed, and Jasmine stepped out last, adjusting her coat as if the cold offended her. Margot forced her face into calm. Doris stayed in the living room, knitting needles in her lap like quiet armor. Charles entered with a bakery bag. Mom, we brought you some food. You haven't been eating. I'm fine, Margot said. Thank you. Henry lifted a container. Soup. And tea. Jasmine smiled too brightly. We're worried, Mrs. Hayes. Grief can do strange things. Charles sat at the kitchen table without asking. Mom, we need to talk about your future. My future, Margot echoed. You're alone, he said, voice gentle in the way salesmen practiced. This house is old. It's unsafe. You could fall, get hurt. Dad wouldn't want you struggling. Henry nodded. We've looked at options. A nice retirement community. Nurses. Activities. Company. The word community again, soft on the surface, heavy underneath. I'm not leaving my home, Margot said. Jasmine's smile held, but her eyes tightened. Of course you don't feel ready. That's why support exists. Places designed for complicated grief. Charles's tone turned more serious. Doris mentioned you've been going out alone. Asking questions. Going to the bank. To the shop. Doris went still. Margot felt anger flare, but she held it down. Charles was building a story where others agreed with him. I've been handling my affairs, Margot said. Henry's voice sharpened. Or you've been spiraling. You're exhausted. That can make people imagine things. Charles slid a folder across the table. We spoke to a doctor. A specialist. He said paranoia after a loss is common, especially at your age. We want to help before it gets worse. He tapped the folder. If you sign these, Henry and I can manage the insurance payout and handle the property paperwork. It'll take stress off you. Margot didn't touch it. What is this? Temporary power of attorney, Henry said quickly. Just until things settle. And if I don't sign? Margot asked. Charles's smile tightened. Then we may have to do it formally. For your safety. There it was. The threat wrapped in tenderness. I need time, Margot said. Jasmine stepped closer. Don't take too long. Decisions get harder when you delay. They left with hugs that felt staged. When the door shut, Margot exhaled like she'd been holding her breath underwater. Doris rose, wrapped her in a real hug and whispered, "They're trying to trap you." Margot nodded. And someone warned me, word for word. That night, Margot sat at the table with a notebook and wrote down everything. The exact phrases, the order they spoke, the doctor's name they dropped. Dr. Albright, the way Henry's eyes flicked to the folder, the way Jasmine watched the room like she was measuring it. She wrote until her hand was cramped, because memory could be challenged, but ink would not flinch. Near midnight, her phone buzzed again. Go to the hospital records office tomorrow. Ask for intake notes. Ask who signed for confidentiality. Don't go alone. The message turned her stomach to ice. It wasn't only about Ernest's death. It was about control, about sealing her away before she could prove anything. The next morning Doris drove her to Memorial Hospital. The records clerk asked for identification and forms, then returned with a thin printout and a hesitant expression. Margot scanned the intake summary. It didn't mention burns. It didn't mention an explosion. It listed confusion, vision disturbance, metabolic imbalance, and a note about suspected toxic exposure. The paper felt like it hummed in her hands, quiet and undeniable. Who signed the confidentiality request? Margot asked. The clerk glanced down at the page. Your sons, she said quietly. Doris muttered a curse under her breath. Margot left the hospital with paper in her purse that felt like proof and poison at once. In the parking lot, her phone buzzed again, and her heart dropped even before she read it. Now you know. Meet me tomorrow at 3 o'clock. Corner cafe. Back table. Come carefully. I'll explain everything. Her name appeared beneath the message. Stephen Callahan. Margot stared at the screen until her eyes burned. A name meant a person. A person meant answers. It also meant the game was moving into a new stage, one where her sons could no longer control the story if she moved fast enough. She looked up at Doris. Tomorrow, she said, voice steadier than she felt, we meet someone who knew Ernest was in danger. Doris's jaw set. Then we go together. Margot slipped the phone into her purse and felt, for the first time since the funeral, something sharper than grief began to rise. Resolve. Margot did not sleep the night before the meeting. She lay in bed listening to the house breathe, wood settling, pipes ticking, the faint rustle of wind against the windows, and wondered how many nights Ernest had lain awake the same way, sensing danger he could not yet name. When dawn finally crept through the curtains, she rose with a strange calm, the kind that comes not from peace but from decision. Whatever waited for her at the corner cafe, she would face it with open eyes. She dressed carefully, choosing clothes that made her feel steady rather than invisible. She slipped Ernest's letter back into her purse, along with copies of the bank statements and the hospital intake notes. Doris insisted on driving her, and Margot did not argue. The streets of Spring Creek looked unchanged, shops opening, a dog tied outside the hardware store, neighbors sweeping porches, but Margot felt like she was moving through a version of town she no longer belonged to. The cafe sat on the corner where Main Street bent toward the old bridge. It smelled of coffee and sugar and early lunches, the comforting scent of ordinary life. Margot scanned the room and spotted the back table immediately. It was half-shadowed, away from the windows, the kind of place people chose when they wanted to talk without being overheard. She sat. Doris took the chair beside her but angled slightly away, as if giving Margot space while still standing guard. Margot ordered chamomile tea, her hands trembling just enough that she wrapped them around the mug as soon as it arrived. Exactly at 3 o'clock, a man approached the table. He was tall, gray at the temples, wearing a plain jacket and carrying a worn leather folder under his arm. His eyes were alert but not sharp, the eyes of someone used to watching quietly rather than accusing loudly. Mrs. Hayes? He asked. Margot nodded. You're Stephen. He gave a small nod of his own. Stephen Callahan. I'm sorry for your loss. His voice held sincerity without performance. Ernest spoke about you often. Margot's throat tightened at the sound of her husband's name in a stranger's mouth, but she gestured for him to sit. Doris rose then, murmured that she'd check the counter, and moved to a nearby table where she could see them both. Stephen placed the folder on the table but didn't open it yet. Before we begin, he said quietly, I need you to understand that what I'm about to show you is painful. There's no gentle way through it. I know, Margot replied. I've been walking toward this for days. Stephen studied her for a moment, then opened the folder and took out a small recorder. He set it between them like a fragile object. Your husband hired me 3 weeks before he died, he said. He didn't accuse your sons outright, but he was worried. I am very worried. He felt pressured. He felt watched. Margot closed her eyes briefly. He didn't tell me. He didn't want to frighten you, Stephen said. He hoped he was wrong. He pressed a button. Ernest's voice filled the space between them, faint but unmistakable. Stephen, I don't know if I'm imagining things, but Charles and Henry keep asking about insurance. They say it's for Margot, but they're rushing me. They want me to sign papers I don't fully understand. Margot's fingers dug into the edge of the table. Hearing Ernest speak again felt like having the ground drop away beneath her and solidify at the same time. The recording continued. Henry asked what I would eat for breakfast. Charles asked what time I left the house. It doesn't feel like a concern. It feels like planning. Stephen stopped the recording. That was 23 days before his death. Margot wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. He knew something was wrong. Yes, Stephen said softly. But there's more. He played another recording. This one was clearer, the voices sharper. No, we can't wait, Charles's voice said. He's starting to hesitate. I already have methanol. It's cheap, it works, and it won't raise alarms until it's too late. Margot's chest seized. She felt as though the cafe had faded away, leaving only the voice of her son, speaking with chilling certainty. Henry's voice followed. And Mom? She won't be a problem. She'll be shattered. We'll handle everything. Stephen stopped the recording again. Silence fell heavy between them. Margot stared at the recorder as if it was something alive and dangerous. They planned it, she whispered. All of it. Stephen nodded. Yes. How did you get this? She asked, voice shaking. Your husband asked me to install recording devices, Stephen said. In the house phone. In areas where conversations tended to happen. He was afraid but didn't know exactly what. He wanted insurance. Not financial but truth. Margot let out a sound that was half sob, half breath. He was protecting me even then. Stephen slid photographs across the table. One showed Charles leaving a hardware store in the neighboring town, a small bottle visible in his hand. The date stamp was clear. He paid cash, Stephen said. Used a false name. But the camera caught him. Margot looked away, then back again, forcing herself to see. And Henry. Financial records, Stephen said, pulling out another set of papers. Gambling debts. Significant ones. Charles owed money to people who didn't wait patiently. They were desperate. Desperate enough to kill their father. Stephen leaned back slightly. There's more you need to hear, Mrs. Hayes. This recording was made the night before your husband collapsed. He pressed play. Tomorrow morning, Henry's voice said. Coffee. We tell him it's a supplement. He trusts us. By the time he realizes something's wrong, he'll already be confused. Margot's tea sat untouched, cooling rapidly. She felt cold from the inside out. Stephen turned the recorder off. I'm sorry. Margot swallowed hard. They told me it was an explosion. They arranged for the narrative, Stephen said. They bribed a doctor to mislabel the cause and pushed for quick decisions while you were in shock. Margot's hands shook. And me. Stephen's expression darkened. They discussed you too. He hesitated, then played the final recording. Once Dad's gone, Charles's voice said, we can't let Mom start asking questions. If she does, we do the same to her. People will understand. A widow. Depression. Margot felt as though the air had been punched out of her lungs. She sat very still, afraid that if she moved, she would shatter. They were going to kill me, she said flatly. Yes, Stephen replied. And soon. The paperwork you described, the power of attorney, the talk of incompetence, that was step one. If that failed, they planned something permanent. Margot closed her eyes. Images flashed through her mind. Henry pouring coffee, Charles handing her a cup with practiced concern, Jasmine watching. She felt sick. How much time do I have? She asked. Very little, Stephen said. They're moving quickly. I intercepted a call this morning. They plan to meet with a judge tomorrow to begin the legal process. Margot opened her eyes. Fear was there, yes, but beneath it, something stronger. What do we do? She asked. Stephen slid the folder back toward her. We will go to the police tonight. Not tomorrow. Tonight. Sergeant O'Connell is honest. He'll listen. Margot nodded. I already spoke to him. That helps, Stephen said. It establishes a pattern. Doris rejoined them, face pale but determined. I heard enough, she said quietly. I'm with you, Margot. Stephen gathered the evidence carefully. One more thing, he said, pulling out a medical report. 3 days before his death, your husband had a full physical at a clinic in the city. Perfect health. No heart disease. No conditions that explain what happened. Margot pressed the paper to her chest. He knew, she whispered. He knew he needed proof. He wanted the truth to survive him, Stephen said. They left the cafe separately, Stephen first, then Doris and Margot a few minutes later. The world outside felt too bright, too ordinary for what Margot now carried. She went home only long enough to gather the original documents and lock the house. Doris waited in the car, engine running. At the police station, Sergeant O'Connell looked surprised to see Margot again, then concerned when he saw Stephen. We need to file a formal report, Margot said, voice steady. For murder. The word landed heavily. Stephen laid out the evidence piece by piece. The recordings. The photographs. The financial records. The medical report. O'Connell listened without interrupting, his face hardening with each revelation. This is monstrous, he said finally. Are you certain you want to proceed? Margot met his eyes. My sons murdered my husband. They planned to murder me. I want justice. O'Connell nodded once. Then we act. By the time Margot returned home that night, exhaustion pressed down on her like a physical weight. But beneath it, for the first time since Ernest's death, there was clarity. The truth was no longer scattered fragments. It was a shape. A story. A weapon. She sat at her kitchen table, Ernest's letter beside her, and allowed herself one quiet moment of grief. Not the helpless kind, but the kind that honors what was lost by refusing to let it be erased. Tomorrow would change everything. The morning after the verdict, Margot woke to silence that felt different from all the other silences she had known. It was not the hollow quiet of shock or the suffocating hush of fear. It was a silence with edges, defined, contained, no longer threatening. She lay in bed for several minutes, staring at the pale ceiling, letting the truth settle into her bones. Justice had not brought Ernest back. It had not erased the years of betrayal. But it had stopped the lies from continuing, and that mattered more than she had ever imagined it would. She rose slowly and moved through the house, touching familiar things with deliberate care. Ernest's mug still sat on the shelf, cleaned now but unchanged. His jacket hung by the door, the pockets empty of screws and folded receipts. Margot did not put it away. She had learned that healing did not require erasing the past. It required learning how to live beside it. Stephen came by that afternoon. He didn't knock loudly, just a soft, respectful tap that Margot had come to recognize. He brought paperwork and updates, but also a loaf of bread from the bakery Ernest used to favor. They sat at the kitchen table, sunlight stretching across the wood between them. The appeals will take time, Stephen said. But the evidence is solid. The convictions will stand. Margot nodded. I don't need speed, she said. I need finality. Stephen studied her with quiet admiration. Your husband would be proud. Margot looked down at her hands. He already was, she said softly. He just didn't get the chance to say it out loud. The town of Spring Creek did not know how to treat her at first. Some people approached with warmth and open sympathy, pressing her hands and calling Ernest's name with reverence. Others avoided her, as if the truth she carried were contagious. Margot let them do as they needed. She had learned that everyone processes fear differently, and she no longer felt responsible for managing other people's discomfort. One afternoon, Doris came over with a stack of envelopes tied together with string. These came while you were at the courthouse, she said. Letters. Cards. Some from people you don't know. Margot opened them slowly. They were messages of support, gratitude, disbelief. One came from a woman in the next county who wrote that her brother had been pressuring their parents to sign papers they didn't understand, and that Margot's courage had made her reconsider staying silent. Another came from a man who had known Ernest years ago and wanted Margot to know that he had never forgotten Ernest's kindness. Margot read every word. That night, she made a decision she had been circling for days. The insurance money, the money that had tempted her sons into darkness, would not be allowed to define her future. She contacted Stephen and asked for help establishing a small foundation, something quiet and practical, focused on helping families recognize financial manipulation before it turned deadly. Stephen connected her with the right people, and Margot did the rest with the same careful persistence she had used to keep her household running for decades. They named it simply, the Ernest Hayes Foundation. Not for publicity, for truth. 6 weeks after the trial, Margot received her first letter from prison. It was from Charles. She recognized the handwriting instantly. Precise, disciplined, the same hand that had once written school essays she'd praised and saved. Margot sat at the kitchen table with the envelope unopened for a long time, the weight of it heavy in her palm. Finally, she slit it open and read. The words were remorseful, desperate, apologetic in a way that felt raw and unpolished, stripped of the charm Charles once used so easily. He wrote of guilt, of sleepless nights, of realizing too late what he had destroyed. He asked for forgiveness. He asked her to tell Ernest he was sorry. Margot folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope. She did not answer. Forgiveness, she had learned, was not a transaction. It was not owed, and it could not be demanded. Weeks later, she received news that Charles had taken his own life in prison. The report was factual, restrained, and brief. Margot sat very still as Stephen explained it, his voice careful and calm. "I'm sorry," he said. "I know this is complicated." Margot closed her eyes. She felt sorrow, not for the man Charles had become, but for the boy he once was. For the version of him who had chased fireflies in the yard and fallen asleep on Ernest's shoulder during long summer evenings. She did not attend any service. There was nothing to mourn that had not already been lost. Henry's fate unfolded differently. After his brother's death, he suffered a complete psychological collapse and was transferred to a secure psychiatric unit within the prison system. Letters from him arrived sporadically, rambling, incoherent, filled with apologies that circled endlessly without landing anywhere meaningful. Margot read the first 2, then stopped. She kept them in a box in the back of a drawer, unopened. "I'm allowed to protect my peace," she told Doris one afternoon, when Doris asked gently if she wanted help sorting them. "Yes," Doris agreed. "You are." The foundation began quietly. Margot didn't give speeches or seek attention. She met people one-on-one, listened to their stories, helped them find legal advice or investigators when something felt wrong. She became skilled at recognizing the early signs of manipulation, the rushed decisions, the isolation, the way concern was used as leverage. One woman, Ellen, came to her shaking with fear. Her brother had convinced their mother to change her will after a medical scare, and Ellen didn't know how to intervene without tearing the family apart. Margot listened, asked questions, and helped Ellen find documentation that saved her mother's independence. When Ellen hugged her afterward, crying with relief, Margot felt something inside her shift. Pain, she realized, could be transformed, not erased, but redirected. 5 years passed. Margot's hair turned completely white, a soft halo that framed her face and made her eyes look brighter than they had in years. The house remained her sanctuary. She painted the walls a warm yellow, Ernest's favorite color, and replaced the old curtains with ones that let in more light. The shop behind the house became a garden, bursting with roses, sunflowers, and herbs she clipped carefully every Sunday morning. Stephen visited every Wednesday. They drank coffee on the porch and talked about cases, about town gossip, about the weather. He never crossed boundaries, never assumed. Their friendship grew slowly, built on respect and shared silence as much as conversation. "You know," Stephen said once, watching Margot prune a rose bush, "most people would have left this place." Margot smiled. "This is where my life happened," she said. "Why would I leave it?" On the 5th anniversary of Ernest's death, Margot organized a small gathering at the garden. She invited neighbors, people the foundation had helped, and a few local officials who had supported the case. Over 200 people came, standing among the flowers Ernest would have loved. Stephen spoke briefly, his words simple and heartfelt. Doris cried openly. Margot stood quietly, hands folded, feeling Ernest's presence not as pain but as warmth. Later, when the crowd thinned, Margot walked alone to the cemetery with a bouquet she had grown herself. She knelt by Ernest's grave and traced the inscription she had chosen. Ernest Hayes. Beloved husband. Honorable man. His love outlived betrayal. I kept my promise, she said softly. I found the truth. I protected myself. And I helped others. The wind stirred the trees gently, and Margot felt at peace. Life did not become perfect. Some nights were still heavy. Some memories still hurt. But Margot no longer feared the darkness. She understood it now. She knew how to walk through it without losing herself. She learned that family was not defined by blood alone, but by loyalty, respect, and care that did not demand silence in return. She learned that love without boundaries could become dangerous, and that courage sometimes meant standing alone. On quiet evenings, Margot sat on the porch with a cup of tea, watching the sun dip behind the trees. She felt older, yes, but also freer. The storms she had survived were etched into her, but they had not broken her. Ernest had once told her that a good life was not about avoiding hardship, but about choosing integrity when hardship came. Margot finally understood what he meant. Her story did not end with tragedy. It ended with truth.